Let's jump into the first question. And this is one that a lot of students struggle with, and I think will be relevant to many people on the call today. And the question is, how do I choose what to include and what to leave out in an already crowded literature review? I think a lot of students can relate to this. It's like the literature review is just all too often this massive mess of jumbled thoughts and endless strings of literature and endless rabbit holes. How do students decide what to keep, what to cut when the literature review is already bursting at the seams?
I think the first thing always to say, and it's a horrible sounding statement, but it's what my supervisor taught me when I was doing my literature review, and that was kill your babies. It's a horrible sounding statement, but it's really about taking a good look at what you're trying to get across with your literature review, identifying what that golden thread is. What is your key message that you're trying to identify, and then cutting out all the fluff. Now, obviously, a literature review is meant to be comprehensive and wide-ranging, so you can't cut out everything. But really, you want to focus on what are the key aspects that you need to cover in order to lay out that gap in your literature. And you also want to make sure you're focusing on more recent literature. So aim for papers from the last 3 to 5 years. 3 years is better. And then always keep in some of those seminal works, the sort of key landmark papers that sort of introduce the topic or the idea. But beyond that, you really want to be cutting out anything that's not contributing to your messaging. And when I say contributing, that's both contributing positively and against your topic as well. So make sure you're looking at both sides of your topic, what people are saying and agreeing with your ideas and what people are disagreeing with your ideas. But you want to make sure you're doing a really comprehensive coverage, but cutting out anything that's not serving the purpose of telling the story that you want to with your literature review. Derek, I'm not sure if you have anything you think might be helpful to add there.
Yeah, I think a litmus test or an easy sort of heuristic that you can always just run is for every piece of content that you're looking at and you're sitting on the fence going, do I keep this? Do I keep this paragraph? Do I cut this paragraph or this page or this set of pages? Go back to your research question and your research questions and say, is this tied to my research question? If it is, how is it tied? Is it tied very, very clearly, or is it just sort of a tangential sort of rabbit hole that I've gone down here and actually this isn't particularly relevant? So I think that research question is always your litmus test. But I think it's also important, as David said, you want to make sure that you're still, be ruthless with cutting your babies, but make sure that you're still presenting both sides of the argument. If there's disagreement in the literature, we spoke about this in our last Q&A session where we were discussing a little bit more about synthesis versus description. You want to make sure that you're cutting it down to as lean as it can be, but be careful not to just get one-sided there and to cut out the actual analytical, critical synthesis aspect of a literature review.
I think the other thing that I'll add is when you're cutting that content, killing your baby, so to speak, don't necessarily throw that away or anything like that. You can always come back to that, do a systematic review, narrative review, publish papers with that information. So it's not lost effort by removing that, but it's really just making sure that the dissertation and the literature review is getting you where you need to be. I always talk about a funnel. You want to start broad, but really end up with the gap that you're addressing and why your research is needed. So if you're getting that smoothly and well supported, then you're good to go.
Good stuff. All right, let's jump into our next question. Just a reminder to everyone, jump in the chat, drop your comments, drop your feedback there. Questions, I will be keeping an eye on that and we'll circle around to them. So don't be shy to ask. But first, let's jump back into one of the pre-submitted questions. And the question is, how do I recover motivation and perhaps the will to live after receiving really tough feedback from my supervisor, from my advisor, or just a big setback in my project? How do I get back on my horse? And I think this is something that so many students can relate to because it's almost an inevitability in the research journey, is that either something's not going to go the way planned or you're not going to get the feedback you want. So David, how do students deal with this?
I think the first is, as Derek mentioned, it's completely normal and part of the process. It's horrible to say it's part of academia, but we expect feedback. We expect roadblocks. We expect that IRB to come back with comments. So First off, it's normal, it's part of the process. And so realizing that helps you sort of put it into context. The next thing to mention is take a break. Obviously, within reason, you don't want to be pushing out your deadlines or anything like that, but burning out, trying to address everything to get back on the horse immediately, that can be overwhelming and can actually put you back. So take a step back, spend some time with the family, with the dogs, with friends, and then come back to the work. And then the first thing you want to do is make a plan. Don't necessarily just try and dive right in and sort of bash your head against the wall. You want to identify, okay, this is the feedback that I got. This is how I want to address it. If it's a roadblock, what are the options that I can take? The next thing you want to do is sort of prioritize those tasks in terms of easy to do versus really hard to do. And then just start knocking off those easy ones to do. Even if it means that you're going later in your literature review and coming back to an earlier section later, it's going to help you build that momentum to get those small wins. And then celebrate those wins as well. The power of sort of positive thinking and framing it positively is really helpful. I recently watched a podcast that talked about dopamine cycles and how you can, by encouraging yourself and celebrating those small wins, you're actually increasing your ability to sort of get into those tasks and make progress as well. When it comes to feedback itself, though, if you've gotten that draft back and there's a ton of feedback and it's overwhelming, first thing to do is read through it all, put it aside, come back a second time, and then start working through those feedback comments, not addressing them, but just making sure you have a clear understanding of what are they actually looking for? What is the feedback? If you're unclear or uncertain, reach out to your supervisor. You don't want to go about making changes, trying to fix something. And if you don't fix it correctly, it's just going to come back again. So work with your supervisor to develop a plan of how you're going to address the feedback. If your supervisor is engaged, if you are struggling to get a hold of your supervisor, talk it through with a friend, get a second opinion, because we're really close to our research. I know when I was doing my dissertation, I had to rewrite an entire experimental chapter because I had planned it one way, we got feedback, and they said, nope, that's not going to work. And so I was devastated. I was overwhelmed. I thought, this is it. I'm going to have to stay in my PhD for another 2 years. But I spoke to my partner. We spoke through the issues. I came back the next day to my supervisor with a plan for how we could address it. And she was able to engage with that, help me identify where my blind spots were. And then we were able to really make progress quickly because we planned and thought it through before we dove in on trying to address it. You don't want to be going down sort of false paths or making unnecessary effort for yourself. So a bit of planning up front is going to go a long way. And then just regular putting the time and effort in. It's going to be hard, but then do those small tasks, build up to the medium tasks. And by the time you get that done, the bigger tasks won't be so intense either.
Great points. I think I'd really emphasize something you mentioned earlier is just, and this sounds so obvious, but man, we've seen it go pear-shaped so many times. And that is the point of make sure you really understand the feedback that your supervisor's given or your advisor's given. And that sounds obvious, but all too often it's, well, I guess there's failings on both sides. One, some advisors just provide very vague feedback, and that's a fault, but hey, that's the reality in many cases. So in many cases, they're just not giving you very specific feedback about sort of what's wrong, why is it wrong, how do you fix it kind of thing. And to a large degree, that's what we're doing at Grad Coach very often, is sort of trying to decrypt the feedback that supervisors give to some of our clients and say, okay, cool, so this is what they mean. But that aside, the point is you really want to make sure that you are on the same page in terms of what they're saying, because sometimes they're very vague and sometimes you've just read the content too quickly. Of course, we're always so eager to jump into the feedback. You've read it, you've interpreted it in a certain way, and now you're locked in and interpreting it that way. And that's David's point of kind of step back from the feedback, re-engage with it the next day. And if you have the ability, get someone else in the academic world to give you a second perspective on that feedback, and don't tell them what you think it means. Ask them, can you read this and tell me what you think it means? Don't poison the well. Let them give you their feedback. And very often you'll see that they read the same thing you read and they see a very different sort of set of requirements that need to happen there. So first step is really just make sure that you're on the same page, and it does very often require just engaging with your advisor. And I know that this slows the process down, and you're going, well, I don't want to ask more questions. I don't want to slow the process down further. But trust me, it's a lot slower when you rewrite the whole chapter and then the supervisor says, oh, well, that's not really what I was asking you to do, sort of thing. So just make sure that you're really clear on that. All right, let's jump into one more question from the pre-submissions. And the question is, what should I do if my research topic has very little existing literature? I think this is something that comes up quite often. Students are interested in an area. It might be a very novel area. It might not be, but nevertheless, they run into a situation where there just isn't a whole lot of solid literature. So, David, how should students think about this? How do they approach a situation where there isn't much literature?
I think the first thing I would say is abandon ship. But in all honesty, if you are early enough in the process that you haven't committed to your topic yet and you haven't necessarily really dove in and you can't find enough literature, don't make your life harder than it needs to be. Adjust your topic, look at related ideas, and then sort of work from there. That's going to make your life easier in the long run, because trying to write a dissertation without a lot of literature support is difficult. It's doable. There's definitely ways and means to get around that, but it does make it more difficult for you. So if you're early enough, don't feel you have to do that topic. It's not your life's work. A dissertation or a doctorate is just the gateway into the research world. You can tackle that topic later on. You can really engage with it in a different context. But let's say you are committed to the topic. You're really passionate about it. You want to work on it. The first thing you want to do is make sure that that lack of literature is a real lack of literature. I had one client that I worked with a couple of years back who was absolutely certain they did not have any literature on the topic. They thought they had identified the perfect gap. They had 2 or 3 papers that they had found, but that was about it. When we worked through those papers, we identified the key words that those papers were using for indexing, and using those, we developed some search terms just to test the waters. In so doing, we found probably another 15, 20 papers. So really always make sure that you're expanding your search strategy, you're identifying what the key aspects are. The other thing you can do is steal from other researchers as well. If you found 3 or 4 papers, take a look at those papers, see who they're citing, what research are they engaging with. That's going to help you move backwards in time to see what all has been done on the topic. And then the other thing that you can do that a lot of clients sort of look over or forget about is to see who is citing those papers you found. So in Google Scholar, you can just pop that paper into Google Scholar, and then there will be a small section that says cited by and a number. If you click on that link, that will give you a list of all the papers that have cited that paper. And that's a really good way to sort of make sure you're up to date with the research, but also to identify anything that's missing. The last thing that also is really important is to make sure you're looking at a range of databases. A lot of people will get stuck on a single database, maybe their university database, and they will be limiting their research. So use other databases, Scopus, Web of Science, you name it. There are a ton of them. There are also specific ones to different fields as well. And then also look at Google Scholar. Be careful with Google Scholar because it indexes everything. But again, that's a really good way that you can go forward to see, am I actually seeing a lack of literature, or is this the case? I think the last point I'll make is if you are finding that there really isn't a lot of literature, you've done an exhaustive search, then the step is, if you're committed to that topic, is to look at what are the related ideas and literature. So break down your topic into what are the key concepts, and where have those concepts been researched? Because you might be able to make an argument for this has been assessed in the field and the second idea has been assessed, but no one has made that connection between the two of them. But by building up your literature review on the basis of those unrelated research, you can then make that connection and point out that gap in the research. So just to recap, abandon ship if you're early enough. Make sure you're expanding and doing a deep search in the literature, taking advantage of keywords, search strings and strategies, so use Boolean operators, and then make sure you're using lots of databases. And then if that gap is real, if there is a lack of literature, look for related research. So for example, if you are working in the field of tech and you're working on AI implementations of HR practices, you want to make sure if there isn't any research in your context, in your country or in your industry, look at related industries to kind of connect with that research to your topic as well. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add there, Derek.
Yeah, I think just in terms of tools and software, students are always interested in what one can use for this. The three that come to mind are Litmaps, Research Rabbits, and Connected Papers. I'll drop those into the comments. Those three pieces of software just sort of, as David was explaining, sort of help you map back and forward. Sort of, if you find a paper that is relevant, who do they cite and sort of where does the rabbit hole go from there, and also who cited them. So those pieces of software are pretty good at doing that. That's Litmaps, Research Rabbit, Connected Papers. I'll drop it in the comments. All right, let's jump on to the next question, which is, how can I make the best use of my advisor's feedback to avoid rewrites and revisions? So I think this sort of touches on what we were speaking about earlier when you're getting some harsh feedback. But I think this question leans a little bit more into how do we just make the most of this relationship that we have with our advisors? Let's be honest, very often isn't great, and we're very often not getting as much love and attention as we'd like to get. So, David, how do students make the best use of advisors' feedback and avoid having to have an unnecessary number of rewrites and revisions?
I think the first thing is always to think revisions and feedback are important. So don't think you can get away with just one revision. It's never going to go down that route unless your university is extremely selfish and holding back on that feedback. But you want to engage with that feedback and get that feedback with your supervisor. If, for instance, they're not willing to do another review of the literature or your draft, you can also try and organize a meeting just to talk through concerns and ideas. And I think that's probably the most important thing to talk about when you're trying to maximize your feedback and revision, is engage with your supervisor as much as they're willing to. So you want to connect with them, reach out, ask them questions. If you're unsure about feedback, get their opinion. Ask them via email, this is my understanding of the topic or the feedback that you've given, and this is how I think I would address it, because that's going to give you a good idea of whether you're on the right track or not. The other thing that you can do is definitely send them a plan of how you're going to tackle the feedback before you dive in and do that on the review. If you want to be minimizing the amount of time that you're writing drafts, put more effort into the planning side of things. So if they've given you a laundry list of feedback, give them a laundry list of how you're planning to address that. And then they can engage with you and tell you, okay, you're on the right track here. This sounds good. Maybe you need to do a bit more of that. And putting that work in up front is going to mean that when you get to the writing stage, you're just going to make much quicker progress and also not be going down sort of false starts or rabbit holes. I think the other thing that I would suggest is make sure you're getting feedback from external sources as well. I know when I was doing my dissertation, my partner read every single one of my chapters. She was not in my field. She was not in my topic area, but it was really, really helpful to get that external feedback. She was able to help me identify where I was on the right track, where things were unclear, and overall helped me to sort of clean out all the high-level bigger issues, so that when it went to my supervisor, I was getting really focused, detailed coverage. And you can reach out to a partner, cohort members, but there are also services like Grad Coach where we really provide that support as well. So it's always useful to get a second opinion on that feedback and also on your draft before submitting it. The last thing I'll mention, and this is it's a terrible thing, but try and submit a draft with as few grammatical and editorial issues as possible, because those are things that sort of slow down your feedback. And if you've got the kind of supervisor who's a stickler for grammar, they're going to focus on those, not focus on the bigger issues. And then those bigger issues are going to carry through later. So really submitting a polished draft, not a perfect draft, because perfection is the enemy of completion, but you really want to make sure that you're giving them the best quality that you can so that you're maximizing the feedback that you get. And then planning, as I mentioned as well, always plan how you're going to engage on the feedback, how you're going to engage with your supervisor, because if you've got a plan, that means they're not feeling like you're running by the seat of your pants, that you've put thought and effort into the engagement to maximize that time. Anything you want to add, Derek?
Great points. I think I would just sort of drill a little harder on something you were touching on there, which is you want to make your advisor's life as easy as possible. And perhaps I would extend this to you want to become their favorite student.
Yeah.
And that's not the way we want academia to work. But it's just human nature, right? Is that if they enjoy engaging with you because you're a very organized student, your writing is tight, it's well presented. If they can put it this way, if they can see that you're really putting the effort into the relationship to make it as productive as possible, you're going to stand head and shoulders above many others. And they will give you some level of preferential treatment. Of course, this varies between advisors, but ultimately, I don't think it's a particularly controversial idea that if you make it as enjoyable as possible to support you as a student, then the advisor whose task it is to support you is going to be more engaged, is going to be more enthusiastic, and you're just going to get some more goodwill there. So don't underestimate that. I think often we kind of feel there's a bit of an adversarial component. Sometimes we feel like, oh, we need to keep this, we need to just stick to the academic side of it. But ultimately, you want to just be an enjoyable person to engage with, and you're going to get the better side of your supervisor. And really, this isn't about, trying to chat them up or praise them and, just like blow up the ego. It's more just about showing that, like, you are really organized and you're really committed to the process. The more they can see that you're committed to the process, the more it's going to nudge them in the same direction. So that's just a softer aspect to keep in mind, and probably something that gets downplayed very often by students.
I think just adding to that, some practical ways that you can sort of make your supervisor's life easier is through things like ahead of a meeting, sending through an email with talking points that you'd like to address, so that you're not sort of throwing new ideas onto them in the session. The other thing is when you're working on feedback, submitting that feedback plan is going to be great for them getting an idea of where you are. You also want to make sure that you're following up sessions as well to confirm your understanding of what they've said as well and what their feedback they've provided. So you're looking for those small practical things that just show the supervisor that you're really committed and engaged with the process, but also that you're not putting all the mental load on them. You're taking responsibility for your own work as well. And they're going to love that. They're going to be so excited to work with you as well. In most cases.
In most cases, apart from the advisors from hell.
Yeah, there's always one of them.
We've got a question that's come in the chat here, and this is probably one that's a little bit too broad to deal with here, but it's broadly speaking, it's a question of what software would you recommend? The student has asked Deduce in Vivo. What software would you recommend when it comes to mixed methods type approaches? So typically we have software that's dedicated to qual and dedicated to quant. How should students think about this in a mixed method environment? Is it a case of, well, you stick to the qual software for the qual stuff, or is there some middle ground here?
So the first thing I would suggest is use the resources you have access to. So your university might have access to in vivo or a license for you for in vivo, you want to stick with those as far as possible. You want to minimize the cost to yourself and take advantage of those resources that you get. That's going to be really important for making your life easier. It also means if they've got that software on their university payroll, they also probably have support and ways to help you with that. When it comes to mixed methods, it really does depend on the complexity of your analysis and what you're trying to get across, because that's going to really affect what analysis tools you're going to use. If you want to be running regressions, if you want to be doing correlations, there's no way in vivo is going to really help you with that. And even if they've introduced that effect, it's not necessarily going to be as easy to work with as using a quantitative software. So I personally always try to use the software that's been designed for purpose. So if I'm doing qualitative, I'd use qualitative software. In vivo, Deduce, Atlas really depends on what you have access to, what you've got experience with, but you want to be using what is appropriate to that task. I know personally from a quantitative perspective, I lean towards SPSS. It's really easy to use, but if you want a lot of control over your analysis, you can look into something like R if you like to code. I know I had to use R for my dissertation and it was a nightmare, but it was really great at what it does as well. Unfortunately, a non-answer, but an answer nonetheless, is take advantage of the software that you have access to. Make sure you're using the appropriate software based on your research questions, needs, and analysis plan. And then lastly, take a look at what previous researchers have used. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you're using a mixed methods approach, the likelihood is someone's done that approach before and they've used specific tools and software. So you can see what's been used, how they've been used. In many cases, you can even reach out to that author, lead author on the paper, if you've got questions, to find out how they used it if it's not clear in the paper itself. I'm not sure if you've got anything to add there, Derek.
Yeah, I think something that I would add that probably just goes a little bit in the other direction, but it's still an important question to ask yourself is, or something that we always encourage our students to do at Grad Coach is really just to keep things as simple as possible. So this applies both in terms of the software question, but also in terms of the methodology component of this question that was asked. And mix often comes up. It's often something that students want to tackle when they come to us in the early stages of the research. And after some digging, after some scratching and trying to figure out what exactly are they trying to do and what's required by the university, it often ends up being the case that, well, actually, no, just a pure qual study or pure quant study is a better way to go. And the maxim that we always run by here is just to do something from a methodological perspective, do something simpler, but do it really, really well. That's going to earn you better marks. So that's not to say, and please don't misinterpret me as saying that never do mixed methods, but it is certainly, if you are considering mixed methods, you want to check, is this really, really what you need to do? You know, if your advisor is telling you you have to do it this way, well, then you have to do it that way. But be careful not to overcomplicate things from a methodology perspective. And equally on the software side, when it comes to qualitative research, in many cases, especially for master's levels projects, you don't necessarily need to go through the whole learning curve of learning a whole new software platform. You can just code the data yourself in Word or whatever, Google Docs or whatever, and you can make sense of that data without having to put it in software. Now, of course, if your university requires you to use NVivo, requires you to do Deduce, that's a different story. But again, just always ask yourself, how can I make this as simple as possible and do it well? You know, we're not saying do something simple for the sake of being lazy or cutting corners. We're saying take a simpler task or methodology and just really execute it to the highest degree, because that's really when your marker is looking at your paper and going, wow, this person was incredibly thorough with this analysis. It's a basic analysis, but they're incredibly thorough and they covered every corner and they've done it really well. that earns you more marks than doing something really complicated, but kind of doing it in a very patchy way. So just keep that in mind, that very often we make assumptions of, oh, we have to do this complex methodology. Oh, we need to learn the software. And then it just creates a whole lot of other things on your to-do list, because now, especially if you're having to go down the R rabbit hole, that's a massive undertaking. That's a separate damn degree that you're going to get in using that software. So just be cautious, I guess, is my word. And I don't know, David, if you share the sentiment, but I thought it's worth throwing out there.
No, I definitely agree with what you're saying. It is so important to not overcomplicate it. And the easiest way to do that is to think about your research question and say, can I answer this question with one methodology, or do I have to use both? If you can answer it with one, ask your supervisor. Go for that mono-method approach. The other thing that I'll also mention is, if you do have to use software, don't try and figure it out all by yourself. There are a ton of resources out there, and your university might have specific courses that you can take as well on these software. That's going to make your life a lot easier when you're sort of learning a new software, trying to understand the way of it. And I will also say I am very much in favor of hand coding. It sort of goes back to the idea of really immersing yourself in the data and really engaging with it. So while I love NVivo and I love Deduce, I personally, if I want to do research, I want to do it by hand, even if that means highlighting things, building up a spreadsheet of all my codes and how often they come up. It just helps me really engage with the data as well.
Yeah. I mean, to put it in context, we offer a coding service where we can do the initial coding for students. Many universities allow us to do that. Some don't. Obviously, we support the students at universities who can. And we do that manually. We don't use, and we do a lot of it. So yeah, we are doing coding for large research projects, and we're not using NVivo. We're not using any of the QDA softwares. We do it manually, partially because there's no major benefit to doing it using the software, but as David mentioned, it just ensures that we can really immerse and we can really understand what's going on with this data. I see there's a question from Khalifa asking, what support do we provide with NVivo data analysis? We do have some coaches who are familiar with that, so feel free to reach out to us. We can support you with that. All right, let's jump back into the questions. I love this one. It's a pretty broad one. And the question is, how do supervisors, how do dissertation advisors, how do they assess dissertations behind the scenes? What are they really looking for? So I guess this is a question of sort of what are the little magic components, if there are any such things, that are really key to an advisor being happy with the project and saying, yeah, this is good enough.
Most supervisors are marking according to a rubric. If your institution's got one, they'll have sent it out. That's going to be your sort of holy grail, golden key. If you can find a rubric for that, that is going to be the first thing that they're going to be marking based on. Following that, they're looking really for, do you understand the research process? Have you gone through the steps of research? So for each chapter, have you achieved what that chapter's out there to achieve? They're not necessarily looking for the most wonderful prose, best framing, perfect language. They're looking to see, have you done what is required to demonstrate that you can do research? And so for the intro chapter, have you identified the gap? Have you provided enough context for the situation or the topic? And have you developed the justification for that research? Have you identified the scope, the limitations, the overall focus of the research? In the literature review, they're really looking for a few key things. Have you done a comprehensive assessment of the literature? They don't want to be seeing any sort of gaps or covered areas. They want to make sure that the idea or topic has been well supported, that there's literature that's covering what each of those constructs or variables are, what's been done recently in the field, and most importantly, are you synthesizing the literature? So are you taking together what all the different researchers have said and pulling out the key message that points to the gap, that your research is addressing. In the methodology, they're looking for methodological rigor. They're looking for comprehensiveness. Have you gone through all the steps required for your methodology to make sense and be repeatable? Someone should be able to read your methodology chapter with no other information and be able to repeat your study. So it's got to be detailed enough. And then the other thing that is always important in the methodology chapter is, are the methodology you're proposing aligned to your research questions? Are you going to actually collect and generate the data you need to answer your research questions? The findings chapter, that's all about, or the results chapter is all about presenting your results. There, they're looking to see, have you presented the results appropriately according to the rules and regulations and expectations for your field? And have you presented the data in a way that represents it accurately? And really, the results chapter is probably the most straightforward chapter in terms of you're just reporting on what you found. The last few chapters, the discussion and the conclusions, that's where they're looking for your voice as the researcher. They want to see that you can take your findings, put it into context of what happened before in the research field, and make suggestions, recommendations, and show criticality of your research. So are you identifying the limitations, the gaps, the potential biases? They're really just seeing, can you take it forward as a researcher? Have you done what is necessary as a researcher? And then lastly, while they're not marking it always, they're always keeping an eye on sort of the overall quality of that writing. Are you following the right formatting structures? Are you writing it smoothly? Is it going to be acceptable? And is it going to be publishable if you're doing doctoral work? And those are some of the key things that they're looking at. It's a long answer, but really it does depend on each institution as well. So if you're doing a practical degree, they're often enough more interested in, have you understood the practical aspects of the research? And if you're doing a very theoretical research, then they're more interested in those sort of development of ideas and exposure of new ideas and concepts. I'm not sure if you've got anything you want to add there, Derek.
Great points. Yeah, I think I'd just circle back around to the very first thing you said, which is it is the task of the advisor and certainly the assessors or examiners to work against a rubric. You know, unless you're at some really scrappy university that just kind of leaves it at the discretion of every staff member to decide whether students pass or fail, and that's sarcasm. That should never be the case. There will always be some sort of rubric, and ideally you will have a view of that rubric. It'll be in your briefing documents or something like that. But failing that, you can certainly ask for it. I don't know that you will always necessarily get it, but there's no harm in asking. And really, your rubric is giving you a master checklist against which to look at each and every chapter of your dissertation or your thesis and go, have I done these things? Now, of course, it's still just a subjective assessment from your side, but at least you know, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. This is what I'm looking for. And so that's certainly very useful. You can also, we have, based on the 10,000 odd students that we've worked with and all of the marking rubrics that we've seen and students have shared with us, we've developed checklists, and you can find those in our research toolkit. That's a free resource. I'll put the link to that in the chat. Just have a look for an area called checklists. And in the checklist section, you'll see for each and every chapter, we've provided a sort of list of, have I done this? Have I achieved this thing, this thing, this thing, many of which are the items that David's touched on. So look at that. Another thing that you can do, and this kind of just came to mind, I haven't tried it, but it's quite plausible, is if you don't have access to the marking criteria, but you do have access to a bunch of dissertations from your department for that degree, one, you can look at them and just get a feel with your own interpretation for sort of what's required here. But two, if you've got 10 or 20 of them, you can throw those into ChatGPT and you can ask ChatGPT to assess sort of the commonalities and what are the key points that everyone's hitting on, what's the sort of standard structure for each of these chapters, what are the key deliverables for each chapter, and it can sort of make an assessment based on those as to what would be roughly expected. Of course, that's far from perfect because one, it's AI, and two, you don't know what the quality of your data set is. You don't know if these dissertations just made it through or if they were, distinction level. But nevertheless, I'm trying to give you a set of options here. But a safe fallback is our checklists within our toolkit. Those are free. If there's any flaw in terms of those checklists, it's that they're probably going to be overkill because we've kind of taken everything that we've seen from all of the universities that we've worked with and tried to merge that into one master list of killer criteria. So that is something that you can do, and I will include that link there. All right, let me just have a look at what else we have. Yeah, we're running up on time. Okay, so this question came up last week, but I think it's just so important to understand correctly. And this question has come through regarding critical analysis / synthesis versus description. So I guess broadly speaking, the question is, when I'm writing my literature review, how do I ensure that I am synthesizing as opposed to just describing the existing literature? And for those of you who were in the workshop last week, I do apologize, but it's probably worth just recapping on that. So David, can you just give us a quick 101 on what the difference is between these two things?
Yeah, so synthesis is really about taking it a step beyond the paper. So you're looking at what are the various authors that have done research on your topic saying together. So you want to be identifying the 3 or 4 papers that push one sort of perspective on the topic. So if it's work-life balance and a few authors are saying it's really important to balance work-life balance with motivation and engagement and achieving things through your personal life, then you want to make sure you're looking at people who are both supportive of it and people who are finding the opposite finding, and then showing how they relate. So a good example would be, you might say, Johnson 2004 demonstrated this relationship in the following constructs. This was further supported by Fredrickson 2007, and I'm running out of names here, the next author. So you want to be combining what those findings. The other aspect is you also want to be critical of the research. So I'm sure many of you have heard that from your supervisor and gone, what are they even talking about? Being critical of the literature is thinking about what that literature has done and where are the potential gaps or problems with the study. Were there any limitations associated with the methodology? Is that the most appropriate way to address that question? You want to show that you're not just accepting the literature, but that you're engaging with the literature and then comparing it to other literature as well. That's a really quick answer, but I'm aware we're running up on time. But again, I think we have the other recording that we have put up as well, so we might be able to share that as well after the session.
100%. I think just to do a little 2-point summary on that is when you're working through literature, one, you want to be addressing both what people agree on and what they disagree on. I think that's really important, especially the disagreement. The disagreement is where the action is in the research, and it's very often where your research gap is coming from. And then, as David so importantly highlighted there, you want to kind of pick apart the methodologies and pick apart the limitations of the existing papers. And you might think, well, who am I to critiquing this stuff when I'm doing a master's project or even a doctoral level project? Who am I to be critiquing the professional researchers? But the truth is, no research study is perfect. It's just not the way that the world works. There's always limitations to everything. And so your job while you're doing the literature review is to assess, are those limitations of genuine concern? Are they relevant? Do they sort of make the case for a need for additional research in this space. So don't be afraid to pick those apart. All right, so we are running out of time, and so I will need to call it a day there. I know that there are questions that we haven't covered. Thank you all for having contributed in the Q&A section in the chat. If you would like to get one-on-one help, we do offer a consultation where you can book a chat with one of our coaches to discuss how we can help you. And then, as promised, here is the access code for the blueprints. So if you're not familiar, we have essentially 4 what we call research blueprints, and these are just little short courses that can help you kickstart the process for everything from finding a research topic to writing a proposal to writing literature review, etc. So these are just little short courses, 2 or 3 hours worth of content each, and we've tried to just kind of deep dive but be as concise as possible in each of those to get you moving forward. These usually retail for about $200 each. You can access all of them, so that's $796 worth of value for the next 2 hours. You can just go to gradcoach.com/blueprints, go to the checkout page, enter that checkout code, and your price will be reduced to 0. So that's just a little something to say thank you all for coming. And on that note, thank you all for coming. It's been fantastic. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for joining us on a Friday. I'm sure there's more exciting things that you'd like to be doing on a Friday, but it's really awesome having some one-on-one, or not one-on-one, but some real-time engagement with all of you. So thank you all for attending. And as I mentioned, you are more than welcome to book a consultation. You can scan that QR code there as well, or just go through to this link, or just go to the website. You'll find the link, book a consultation, have a chat with us. And if nothing else, enjoy the blueprints on the house. So thank you all, and we will let you know when the next one is. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one and enjoy the weekend.
Cheers.